So today's conversation is about building a patient-driven movement because as it turns out, patients are experts in their disease and their knowledge can help accelerate the pace of research. So we have an amazing panel here today to discuss this more. Joining us are Tania Simoncelli, VP of Science and Society at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Dr. David Fagenbaum, a rare disease patient, renowned researcher and Rare as One grantee, Brian Wallach, an ALS patient advocate, Sandra Abrevaya, a caregiver and advocate. And leading today's conversation is award-winning journalist and New York Times best-selling author, Katie Couric. Please put your hands together.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see all of you today. And that film is so inspiring. And, I think Susanna, Tess, and Colton are just three of the patients who have felt the impact of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative at the Rare as One program. And we're going to learn a lot more about the incredible work this organization is doing. And I'm going to start with you, Tania. You've been at CZI for almost 6 years, leading the Science and Society program, and this is your baby. This is your flagship project, Rare as One. When I look at some of the numbers in that really wonderful film, I think, gosh, the numbers, these diseases don't seem that rare.
Yeah. So that's right. So rare is a little bit of a misnomer for a couple of reasons. These diseases first of all, there's more than 7,000 rare diseases that are affecting more than 300 million people around the world. And these diseases kind of run the gamut between the kinds of diseases that you just saw talked about in that film that are where we know of only a couple hundred people around the world with those diseases. So there's lots and lots of these really rare, what we refer to as ultra rare diseases. And then there are diseases that are more common than that, but still fairly rare. But those diseases can affect tens of thousands of people here in the U.S.
In fact, what's the definition, Tania, of a rare disease? Isn't it a specific number?
Yeah, so in the United States, the definition is a disease that affects fewer than 200,000 people. So a disease like ALS, like cystic fibrosis, those affect tens of thousands of people here in the United States. So they're a lot less rare. But the bottom line is that rare is actually incredibly common. It's estimated that upwards of 30 million Americans are affected by a rare disease. That's almost 1 in 10 people. So this is a serious global health challenge, and we really should be thinking about rare collectively is incredibly common.
Because the numbers add up, to say the least. Dr. Fagenbaum, who told me I could call him David.
Yes.
So David, I think your story illustrates how profoundly your firsthand experiences have affected you. Your mom died of cancer when you were in college, which made you want to become an oncologist. Right. And then, in your third year of medical school, you were diagnosed with something called Castleman disease. First and foremost, what exactly is Castleman disease?
Sure, it's an immune system disorder where your immune system attacks and shuts down your vital organs for an unknown cause. Unfortunately, patients with my subtype of Castleman disease, most of us will not survive more than 1 or 2 years after diagnosis because the immune system just attacks your organs so relentlessly.
How rare is Castleman?
It's rare. It's about 5,000 new cases per year in the U.S., and because it's so deadly, that means that there aren't too many of us around.
In fact, you talk about it being deadly. You were hospitalized a number of times, and you nearly died on 5 different occasions. Tell us about that.
That's right. So as you shared, I was a healthy third-year medical student. I wanted to treat patients in memory of my mom, who had died just a few years before from cancer. When I became critically ill, all of my organs shut down. I gained 70 pounds of fluid because my liver and kidneys weren't working. And I was so sick that my family came into the room to say their final goodbyes. And a priest read me my last rites when I was 25 years old. Sadly, that was just the first time, and I would go on to nearly die 4 more times. But thankfully, chemotherapy kept saving my life, but I knew that there was no way I would live much longer unless I could find a drug that could maybe save my life.
So that obviously is a good segue to my next question. You're in and out of the hospital over a course of 3 years. So you decide to start an organization and build a community of other people who have this disease or have knowledge about the disease. So why was that so important, which seems obvious, but what was the upshot of that? What kind of response did you get, and where did it get you in terms of understanding your disease?
Well, there were no drugs in development and no promising leads, and so I knew my only chance of survival would be to do exactly what you said, Katie, to bring together the community of patients, physicians, and researchers, and to start looking for existing drugs that were already FDA approved for something else that we could maybe repurpose for my disease. I didn't have $1 billion in 10 years to wait for a drug. If I wanted to make it to my then fiance's and my wedding day, which was May 24th, 2014, I would need to find a drug that could be repurposed. And we couldn't take the old approach. Castleman's has been well described for centuries, right? And very little progress has been made. So we said we have to take a totally new approach. We need to build a community of physicians, researchers, and patients, crowdsource from that community what are the most important research questions, then go out and recruit the best researchers in the world to actually do the research. We couldn't just wait for the stars to align. And when we dug in to look for existing medicines, we knew that was possible because many diseases share the same common problems and can therefore be treated with the same drugs. And so I went on this journey with my colleagues and my family and my friends, and we eventually uncovered a drug that's been around for decades that was not made for my disease, that we were able to repurpose and began testing it on me. And thankfully, it's now been over 9 years that I've been in remission on this drug that wasn't made for my condition.
Wow, that's amazing. But obviously, people are so thrilled for you, David, but I have to imagine those are applause for all the other lives that have been saved as a result of your research and as a result of your approach. And I know that as a patient, you had a unique perspective, and I'll talk to Brian and Sandra about that. The three of us are a throuple, if anybody wondered. But I'm going to talk to them about their unique perspective. But, what does being a patient add to the advocacy?
Everything. I was a medical student, and I thought that I had an idea for how research should be done, how the medical field should work. But I had lost my mom to cancer, so I certainly knew the experience. But becoming a patient, it gives this incredible sense of urgency for everything. Every minute counts, every second counts. I've considered myself in overtime since I had my last rights read to me, and that feeling of overtime, every second counting, has been a total game changer for us in Castleman's, and also a sense of collaboration. We don't care whose idea it is or who gets credit. We just want solutions. We just want drugs that can help patients. And the last thing I'd say is this sort of concept that we don't care how it's been done. We just want to do it. And so, I shared about this drug that's saving my life, sirolimus, and thankfully patients all over the world, but we've actually uncovered 9 more drugs, both within Castleman's and outside of Castleman's, that can be used in new ways. Drugs that are on your pharmacy shelf at your CVS that no one knew could be used in those ways. And there's a young girl, Kayla, who was 15 years old at the time, and we just made the discovery in the lab. We thought this drug could be useful. It wasn't made for Castleman's, but she'd spent an entire year hospitalized, and within a couple weeks of our discovery in the lab, we started Kayla on this drug, and this past Thanksgiving marked 2 years that she's been in remission on this drug. And so, as you said earlier, I'm so thankful to be alive. I'm so thankful for what we've done with this drug, but there are so many more opportunities out there. And I'm not supposed to be here, but every moment that I'm here, I'm going to be working to figure out how we can unlock the full potential of these drugs for other patients.
And I imagine the most empathetic researcher or scientist can't really understand what a patient can tell those people in terms of side effects, in terms of efficacy, right? To be able to have a real person give real-time feedback, and not to mention a doctor, right? To have that double whammy, I'm sure it's invaluable.
It's really changed my life in every way, and I get to work with amazing people like Brian and Tania, and just so thankful for the time that I have and to be able to work with these amazing colleagues.
Well, we're going to get to Brian and Sandra in a minute, because I know they're like, what about us? That's what Brian is thinking anyway. What about me, Katie? But I want to talk to Tania first, because it was your experience, David, that really inspired Tania to start Rare as One. So tell us how you got to know David and how he motivated you.
Yeah. So I actually met David when I was literally like in transition on my way to starting my new role at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And CZI has this incredibly audacious mission to cure, manage, or prevent all diseases by the end of the century. I was really drawn to that really bold mission and like this opportunity to really think big about that whole space and to think sort of also a little bit outside of the box. And I had, along the way, I'd been working in science policy for a couple of decades before and had been doing a lot of work on biomedical research and innovation. And along the way, I had been finding myself just increasingly inspired and sort of drawn to the work of patient advocates and thinking, you know, the patients are the ones who are really driving changes in our ecosystem. And like, why is it that like they're like doing this on like, very few resources a lot of the time, and why aren't we actually funding them as part of the solution to sort of drive research forward? And so I knew I wanted to go to CZI to build a program that was focused on bolstering the power of patient communities. And I was sort of zeroing in a little bit on rare disease for a little, but I didn't really know how I was going to do it, and I didn't know what the program might look like. And then I met David. I heard him speak at this conference, and I'd heard about his story, but I'd never actually met him. And I was blown away. I had this like aha moment because he laid out what he just laid out, which sounds incredibly logical. Like if you're going to cure a disease, like a rare disease, like realizing, wow, there's like a few researchers working on this, but none of them are talking to each other. And like he realized like the most important thing a patient needed to do who wanted to change that was to actually build a community and then get a community of not just patients, but patients, researchers, and clinicians, get them to work together, get them to share ideas, and get them to develop a prioritized research agenda. And it just seems so logical, but research really didn't work like that. And I was like, that's like generalizable, that's scalable. And so I kind of went up to him at the meeting. I was like, all of a sudden, like his number one groupie, I think. I was like, David, I want to do this.
She really is.
I want to figure out how to do this for all rare disease. And he was like, okay. And so we've been working together ever since. And the Rare as One network, the film you just saw, those are two of our grantees within a Rare as One network. And the network has now funded 50 rare disease communities that are literally doing the work that David has done, building research communities, galvanizing research in their disease areas, getting the community to really work together.
Because I imagine it's a very isolating experience to have this disease and to have a community of people who are all working for the same thing must mean everything for these families. And let me tell you a little bit about Brian and Sandra. They're truly amazing people like David. Their expertise wasn't really in medicine. They were thrust into this situation when Brian was 37 years old. The day they brought their second daughter home from the hospital, Brian was told that he had ALS. We're going to hear what doctors said to Brian and Sandra in a second, but the way they met, they were both working on the Obama campaign, and they met in New Hampshire. They were running didn't work out that well for you guys, but that's okay.
We won the general election, Katie, a little credit.
But New Hampshire.
I mean,
Okay, anyway.
primary sucked, general won. Anyway, okay, we can talk about it later.
So anyway, they met and fell in love, and they're an extraordinary couple. And, you know, their entire lives in front of them, as I said, their second daughter comes home from the hospital, and Brian gets this news. Brian, what did doctors say to you on that day that you were diagnosed with ALS?
I went to the neurologist. And he said to me, he examined me for just about 10 minutes. And then he told me to sit down. And then he said, have you heard about Lou Gehrig? And I said, yes. And he said, I think you have his disease. And I said, okay, I don't know much about that, but what does that mean? And he said, there is no treatment. There is no cure. And I said, how long do you think I have? And he said, on average, people live people live 6 months after they are diagnosed. And I am happy to say I am 5.5 years past diagnosis.
Brian and Sandra are the kind of people who did not just sort of wallow in their own circumstances and kind of give in to despair. You both decided you had to do something about this. You had to help the ALS community. So you sprung into action, Brian. You kind of dragged Sandra along with you because you basically said, we've got to start an organization, and she was like, hell no. You talked her into it, and then you guys started I Am ALS. Sandra, tell me about this organization, because ALS organizations existed before Brian's diagnosis. What was your goal for I Am ALS?
Yeah, absolutely. So after I said, hell no, we can't start an organization, I did say, okay, let's figure out exactly what's happening in the ecosystem, which again is so important in any disease community, right? To you, David's point, you don't care who wins, you just want to live.
Exactly.
And so it is important to get an understanding of the landscape and say, okay, is there a nonprofit out there that does what needs to be done that's missing from the fight? And Brian then, instead of like going out on his bucket list of vacation destinations after being diagnosed, or frankly helping me with a 2-year-old and a newborn, he took to planes, trains, and automobiles, and he hit the road to answer that question. What needed to happen in this space that wasn't happening so that we didn't duplicate efforts and added value? And it turns out that the answer was very much aligned with our background in politics, in community organizing, and what we felt that wasn't necessarily needed was just another organization, but a movement, a community to mobilize together to help especially drive federal funding and legislation that could significantly accelerate the pace with which we were developing drugs and approving drugs. And so that's what I Am ALS's superpower is. We've become, in just a few short years, the leading advocacy organization.
And you both, I mean, you have unique backgrounds. Brian is a lawyer. Sandra has her experience running a whole series of nonprofits. And in addition to that, excuse me, your political acumen, you know, understanding how movements work and how actually to enact legislative change came in very handy. So talk about how you used the experience of working for President Obama's campaign and your respective professional experience to really get things changed on Capitol Hill, because you did a tremendous job. And can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Brian, do you want to start off, or you want me to start off? Okay, Brian, so you start, and then I'll go after you, but what you really mean is you'll
Correct
basically
you.
Negate everything, right? Okay, that's good. So, okay, the main focus really for us at the outset was increasing federal funding, because ALS federal research funding had flatlined for decades. And so we knew from working in the Obama campaign and working in the White House, and I had also worked for a congressman, for a senator, for a cabinet secretary, and so we understood that the key to good organizing and advocacy is people need to believe in their own power. That is, like, turns out, the hardest part. People don't, and everybody kind of knows this, they don't vote because they don't think their vote matters, and people don't reach out to their legislators because they think that their call is just a drop in the bucket. But the hardest part, and if you can get this part right, everything follows, is convincing people that their action will contribute to something really big. And so we did that, and we drove up federal funding in the early days by $80 million. And that is the same type of funding that the Ice Bucket Challenge generated in a viral moment that was never repeated. And the funding we increased happens now every year. So it is like a silent Ice Bucket Challenge, now funded by the government every single fucking year. Excuse me.
Yeah. It's amazing. But wait, there's more. You all did some other changes in government policy that was really life-changing for ALS patients. Can you talk about Social Security benefits, disability benefits, and also access to experimental drugs?
Do you want to go? What happened before we started was that ALS patients and had to wait 5 months to get disability benefits. And for a patient, that may be the rest of their remaining life. So we worked with the other ALS groups to push forward a bill that would allow patients to access benefits the day they are diagnosed. And I am very happy to say that within 1 year, after 1 year of mobilizing, we passed it into law. And now every ALS patient receives benefits right away.
Wow.
And as Katie said, wait, there is more. Yeah, the last thing we wanted to share about on this front is Act for ALS. Hold on 1 second. Fucking ALS. Although, it is a moment to point out that Brian's socks say, busy making a fucking difference. So the last thing on this particular front that Brian really led on was that 90% of ALS patients don't get access to drugs that are in the pipeline because we're disqualified from clinical trials a pretty short period after we're diagnosed. And it's sort of two sides of the coin. It's an extremely exciting time for ALS because there are all these drugs in the pipeline, but the typical FDA process takes years. And so you essentially, if you are 6 to 12 months into your diagnosis, you know about these drugs that are in clinical trial that are stopping the ALS for some people, and you are literally locked in a burning building and you cannot get out. Even though you know that those drugs are working, you do not have access. And so Brian literally went to the Hill and said, we need to write a bill that will allow patients, after the drug has been proven safe in phase 2, to get access before another 5 years passes for the full approval, because these drugs are not a safety risk and they are showing some signs of efficacy, which is why they're getting into phase 3. And if we don't get access now, we're gonna die. We know what's behind door number 2. So just give us the access, or we have no other choice, right? And Brian literally wrote a bill from scratch called Act for ALS that authorized $500 million over 5 years for FDA and NIH to give ALS patients access to drugs faster and mobilize the community, and it became law a year and a half ago. And it is funded at $500 million, authorized at $500 million. Did you want to say anything?
Patient. You know, David, the sense of urgency you talked about, this desperation, hope, commitment, drive, relentlessness, I think is so, exhibited in all three of you and in so many patients with rare diseases. You know, I read about Brian and Sandra in a Politico Sunday magazine article written by someone I had worked with or knew of named Sam Stein, who'd been at the Huffington Post. So I read this. You know, I just happened to be scrolling on my phone, and this article was so well written and so beautiful. And it mentioned that there was a documentary in the works about Brian and Sandra. So I DM'd Sam Stein on Twitter, and I said, hey, Sam, it's Katie Couric, can I call you? And so I called Sam, and then I said, I'd love to help with this documentary. I was so moved by your piece. And so now I'm one of the executive producers of a documentary called No Ordinary Campaign, and it's being shown here at South by Southwest. It's going to be shown tomorrow night. And we had to get a bigger theater. Sounds like we're going to need a bigger boat. But we had to get a bigger theater because there was so much interest. But we still have tickets, and it would mean the world to all of us. If anybody is interested, it's 8:15 tomorrow night. It's the same night as the Academy Awards, but who cares about the Academy Awards? I certainly don't. Anyway, oh, I better not say that. I care deeply about the Academy Awards. Anyway, we're very excited that it's being screened here at the festival, so I hope some of you will come. And you know, Brian, in this movie, and it's so inspiring, and it's so uplifting to see. I always think of the Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of committed individuals can save the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think these three people on this stage, and Tania as well, are proof that that axiom is true. But in the movie, Brian, you say at one point, is this insane? Why am I not at home with my kids right now? So do you ever wonder, is it insane? And if not, why not?
One thing before I answer that. When Katie reached out to Sam, Sam sent us a text message. And he said, Katie Couric wants to meet you. And my reply was, that's an awful joke to make. Like, don't tease me. And he's like, no, guys, I'm really serious. But to Katie's question, this is insane. What David did is insane as well. And the fact that we have to the fact that we have to save our own lives as patients while we are trying to live is crazy. But that is the reason why this journey had to happen. And as Sandra said, we had a 2-year-old and a newborn. And I left her to go out into the community and meet people and convince them that we had the power to do what had not been done for 150 years. Which leads which is oh, you guys I think got it before I did, which is to save the world. No, that's not it? No. Hold on, that's not it. We're starting over. 1 second, friends. Which is to turn? I know this. Which is to turn ALS from terminal to chronic. Man, you're making me sweat.
What is really cool about what Tania is doing, you're taking stories like Brian and Sandra and David, and you are creating, using their various skills and approaches, and you're creating a blueprint for other people with rare diseases, really a template. Tell us how you're doing that and how you're then paying it forward to these other organizations, or even encouraging them to be created in the first place, right?
Yeah. So at CZI, we really believe that people who are experiencing a challenge, and this is across all of our work, not just in our Rare as One program, people who experience a challenge are the most likely to be the ones to come up with the best solutions. And so a lot of what we're doing with the Rare as One project is looking across this landscape and finding these golden nuggets, these incredible people who are just doing extraordinary things, and then thinking like, how can we replicate that? How can we, and I told the story about David, but we're also thinking about it in the form of tools and roadmaps and like resources for the broader community. So I met Brian and Sandra just 6 months after their diagnosis, and I was blown away. Like Brian and I sat down for an hour, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is going to do something extraordinary. And what really impressed me is that he was, taking this background that he had in political organizing, this understanding of political organizing, and saying, what happens if we apply that to a rare disease? What happens if we apply, 21st century political organizing tools to a rare disease? Can we really build a sustained movement in ALS? What can that look like? And why isn't everybody else doing this? We did it in HIV/AIDS, but a lot of these groups really haven't figured out how to do that. And I was like, that is interesting. And can you document what you're doing? And can you build a tool to help other groups do what you're doing? Because I knew, and so I made a bet on them, because I just was like, this is really, really interesting. And so they developed a platform, an organizing platform that now every rare disease community can look at, not just rare disease, like patient communities can look at and learn from the do's and don'ts of how to organize your community, how to engage with researchers, how to do this kind of work. And
government?
Yeah,
With
and how to
government?
work with
Yeah.
government. And similarly with David, he's figured out how to repurpose drugs. He's done this now 10 times. So David and I worked together on a project that just got launched.
Every Cure, is
yeah,
that it?
Not Every Cure exactly, but it's actually folding in now to Every Cure. We'll talk about it in a minute, but I'm sure. But it's actually a roadmap for drug repurposing. And it just got launched on Rare Disease Day, which is the last day of February, just 2 weeks ago. And it's a roadmap that's helping rare disease communities understand, how do I integrate drug repurposing as part of my research strategy? And it's a really comprehensive roadmap that explains, again, kind of the do's and the don'ts and how to go about this really important work. So these tools that we can now generalize and use and like you said, we're starting to kind of map out a whole roadmap.
See, I think that this repurposing of already existing drugs is so fascinating. My sister was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and her doctor, David, I think at one point she was getting a chemo cocktail that included thalidomide, which was the drug that pregnant women took for morning sickness that resulted in deformed babies back in the 50s and early 60s. But they saw that it might have an anti-angiogenesis property. In other words, it might cut off the tumor's blood supply. And I thought that's so fascinating. A drug that caused real damage in one situation could be incredibly efficacious in another.
Yep.
So in addition to having the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, you have something called Every Cure. So tell me about Every Cure versus sort of your umbrella organization.
Yeah, that's right. So Katie, this concept of drug repurposing is taking a drug that's approved for one thing and trying it in other ways. And so we launched an organization called Every Cure about 6 months ago. And we are on a mission to unlock the full potential of every drug that's at your neighborhood pharmacy to treat every disease that drug can treat. And when you hear that, you might be like, well, isn't that how it is already? Like, aren't the drugs that are approved already being used for all the diseases they can help? The answer is a definitive no.
Isn't it called off-label when they're used?
Yes, so off-label exactly is when you use something, for something that is not on the label, it's not approved for, but that's really just just a little bit of the story here. So if it's being used off-label, that means someone knows that it might be useful in a new way. But there's actually so many more opportunities where we don't yet even know, or maybe someone knows and they published it in a medical journal, but it hasn't actually gotten out to patients. I'll share one quick example of a patient with angiosarcoma, a horrible form of cancer. He came to our center in 2016 and said, diagnosed with this horrible cancer, been told I've got 3 months to live. And we ended up leveraging this tool that we built to look back at previous studies that have been done and found that back in 2013, a paper came out suggesting a drug could be useful for his cancer, but it had never been used in those 3 years. And so we tested his tumor, it looked promising, and we began him on this treatment. And it's now been over 7 years that he's doing great on this drug. And now patients all over the world are on this drug for angiosarcoma. Now that drug was always there. The study had been done 3 years before. It was just sitting there, but there's billions of papers that are written and that are just sort of hiding in plain sight. And so Every Cure is on a mission to say, every drug in your pharmacy should be used for every disease, and every patient whose life can be saved by a drug in your pharmacy should be saved by that drug. And so we're on a mission to do that by first combining data like the data I just mentioned together into one place, and then taking the most promising opportunities, actually moving them into clinical trials, proving that they work as a nonprofit organization in the way that typically pharmaceutical companies would do this, but for drugs that are generic or for diseases that are rare, where we know drug companies won't go after them, we're taking the lead.
There's another, did you guys want to add something to that?
I am pretty sure that I'm older than David. But when I grow up, I want to be David.
That's the best compliment that I've ever received in my life, just so you know. This is number one compliment for me in my life. Thank you, Brian.
I think a lot of people would like to be Brian when they grow up, just
I agree.
saying. There are also some practical applications to this repurposing of drugs, and that is pharmaceutical companies sometimes don't want to invest in rare diseases because the profit margin is not going to be that great. So by taking pre-existing drugs and trying to find a different application, I imagine that can be very motivating for
Absolutely.
pharmaceutical companies. Talk about that, Tania.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, David has really documented this in launching Every Cure, just that how much less expensive also it is to actually repurpose a drug. It can take, it's over $1 billion is usually the number thrown around to develop a new drug, but it's much, just like orders of magnitude cheaper if you can actually find a drug that already works. So it's kind of crazy that we're not doing this systematically, and what David his vision for Every Cure is just really inspiring. But the other thing is, in terms of new drugs, the whole reason why we are investing in patient communities, especially in rare disease communities can really help de-risk sort of drug development when repurposing is not an option, or obviously repurposing should always be looked for. So the two stories that were in the video, Luke and Kim, like the incredible work they did in those groups, like there's a statistic that it typically takes 30 years from the time that a disease is discovered or basic biology is happening to actually develop a treatment. And they are reducing that to less than 10 years. And the way they're doing it is they're going out, they're building these strong communities, finding all the patients they can around the world that have these diseases, and they're collecting their data, their biospecimens, they're building these research-enabling tools and infrastructure that are attracting researchers to their diseases. And then they're basically handing these, they're designing natural history studies, right? So that you can understand the natural trajectory of the disease, which is really critical for a drug company to be able to then test compounds against something and just see if it's actually working or not. And they're literally handing these things on a silver platter to companies, and companies saying, yeah, I want to do that. I want to work with that. You heard the representative from the biotech company talking about just the incredible value of the patient community and like moving along the gene therapy. And so the idea that patient communities can both like really de-risk these drugs and really speed the acceleration of drug development, but they also really need to be pursuing repurposing, which can go a lot faster and be a lot cheaper.
When you look at these families, I mean, I don't know, I find it so moving and so inspiring to see them with their sort of the spirit they bring to their fight, and the ingenuity and the creativity and the humanity. What have you learned from all these families? Obviously, I can tell, Tania, you're so passionate about your work, and I think they give you your why and your purpose.
Yeah. Katie, it's really interesting when I reflect back, because I've worked in science policy and advocacy for over 25 years. I think I'm definitely the oldest one among all of us. And I've worked with, I started my career in environmental policy, and I know some extraordinary environmental advocates, but there is something really unique and special about rare disease advocates. And I think it's partly because no one plans to do this, right? It is by accident and misfortune that people get diagnosed with these diseases, and the diagnosis itself is incredibly life-altering experience. And to be told there's nothing you can do, we know next to nothing about this disease, there's no hope, go home, get your affairs in order, these crazy things that these patients are being told, those who say no to that, those who say, I am going to fight, I'm going to find a way, those are truly special people. And they are relentless. And I am so inspired by them every day, and it just makes me just want to run through walls with them to find ways to really scale and develop this whole concept of patient-driven research. So I've learned so much from them.
And they're really lucky to have you in their corner. Can I just say that, Tania? In closing, at the beginning of the documentary, No Ordinary Campaign, which shows tomorrow night at 8:15, please come. We'd love to see you all. And there's going to be a special panel afterwards. But at the beginning of the movie, Brian, you talk very poignantly about how we don't really care about things until they happen to us. Mm-hmm. So I would just like to end this conversation with the question, why should people care about Castleman Castleman disease, for example, David, or about ALS, Brian and Sandra, you know, I think that we tend to push things aside and say, oh, that happened to somebody else, right? And it's almost like, thank God it's not me, you know, even though people probably wouldn't verbalize it, but they probably are, it frightens them. And so why should people care, and how can they get involved? Why don't I start with you, David?
Sure. So I guess the first thing I would say is that all of the people out there that have cared so far and have contributed to our Castleman's effort, they can feel this incredible source of pride that there are children and people all around the world that are alive and well because of support they gave to us to enable the work that we've done. So that's why I guess other people should care, is that there's this incredible impact we've made, but we still have a long way to go. And then I'll also use your question to also make a comment about Every Cure. So now Every Cure, of course, we're on a mission to unlock every drug for every disease out there. So if you know someone with a disease that's not currently being treated effectively, that's the disease that we're going after. And so you can learn more about what we're doing at everycure.org and be so thankful for your support.
Brian and Sandra, I'm going to let you have the last word.
I will say two quick things. Number one, David, Sandra, and I are regular people who were given an extraordinary challenge. And the thing is that everyone in life will have an extraordinary challenge. And the most important thing we can do is to take action now so that when the challenge happens, we have a drug. And a doctor can say to you, you have this disease, but I have good news. We can treat you. And if we all act, we can make that real.
I know we're out of time. That's a beautiful way to end it, but I have one other thing to say. Sorry. I just wanted to mention one other thing that we weren't able to really cover, and we don't have to go into a long thing because the clock is ticking. But it is that, you know, neurodegenerative diseases like ALS, it's not just ALS that they're talking about cures. They're talking about things like Alzheimer's, which is going to skyrocket with an aging population, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, a whole host of diseases. And I imagine that also Castleman disease, when you think of ways to treat that and cure it, that can have applications in other diseases as well. So it's not just these individual diseases, it's a host of them that we're unlocking the mystery. And it can affect far more than just your individual communities. It can affect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And I think that's just an important point that I wanted to make. Even though Brian ended this panel so beautifully, I couldn't shut up. So Sandra, Brian, David, Tania, thank you all for what you're doing. Let's give them a huge round of applause, everyone.